Hello OSA, Taras here, and welcome to an exciting new series we're going to start launching about the creepy little crawlies that interact in the spaces in between spaces in our aquariums. Yes, you heard it right. Today we're starting a new series. What is an invert? If what is a fish and what is a coral is a difficult enough question, what is an invert is even more confounding because they come in all shapes and sizes. You can have sea cucumbers, you can have shrimp, and you can have snails. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite inverts in the aquarium hobby of all time. This is one of those creatures that when I first bought it at my local pet store, I guess I'll plug them, Seahorse Pet Shop in Westerly, I was pumped. They're one of these critters that once I put them in the tank, it revolutionized the hobby for me as far as reconceptualizing that freshwater tanks not only can have cleanup crew, but they deserve cleanup crew. Having the most complex and multifunctioning ecosystem-based aquarium is the best way to reconcile both beauty, functionality, and long-term success. So today, we're going to be talking about my favorite freshwater cleanup crew agent, the Plantar Bella. So these are the Ramshorn snails. These guys, I call them just the Plantar Bella because there's a couple different species, all the way from Canada, all the way through North America, and even Central and South America. But for the most part, I just call them Plantar Bella and just call them Ramshorns. First off, they breathe air. So anytime you have them in a static container like this, they'll always start to migrate to the surface and they'll even start to come out of the water if there's not sufficient aeration. It's because they have a giant lung in the center of them and they're able to take huge gasps of air and then distribute all that oxygen throughout their body. It's really cool. In the wild, most of the Plantar Bella that you'll see will be a brown mahogany color. That's kind of cool, especially if you're going for a nice wooden aesthetic. There are also blue ones and some other colors in the hobby, but the red ones are my favorite because they're not truly red. One of the magic about the Ramshorn Plantar Bella snails is that they breathe air, and just like us, they bleed red. So they have hemoglobin. These guys are not really red, they're actually albino, and their hemoglobin is showing through. For that reason, very easily we were able to breed albino versions of the species, and now the aquarium industry is blessed with these brilliantly red crimson snails. When these guys are given a little bit of calcium and brought up to a pH of about 7, you can add some seashells, add some alkalinity, add some neutral buffer, add some calcium, small amounts of course, and they really will have this beautiful amber crimson shining shell. So beyond just loving the snails themselves, let's talk about why there's such great cleanup crew in the freshwater aquarium. First off, they have, like all snails, a radula, which is essentially like this really plastic O-ring of a mouth. And the O-ring is surrounded by layers and layers of concentric razor blades. And for that reason, the snail is able to carve, literally scrape like a microscopic razor blade up against the glass, rocks, and wood of your aquarium. And they specialize in eating biofilms, which are essentially what cloud your tank and grow on your glass and make your walkwork look anything less than pristine. So what they specialize in is scraping off those bacterial and microalgal biofilms. They turn that into two things. One, they turn that into more snails. These guys readily breed in the aquarium. They're all hermaphroditic, so once they mate with one of the other ones, they can store sperm and they can just cop out babies whenever they want through these brilliantly amber egg sacs. And then two, they take all that biofilm and that algae and that bacteria that they graze off of and uneaten feed, and they excrete essentially plant fertilizer. So these guys, with a few exceptions, are a wonderful complement to most hardy aquarium planted tanks. So as long as you don't have anything that's too delicious, they really aren't known for grazing on vegetative matter. They like detritus, they like uneaten feed, they like dead algae. So if you really want to boost their population, algae wafers from Macari are a great idea. But for the most part, these guys do specialize in really scraping off those biofilms. So, if they're eating at a plant, it's not necessarily that they're consuming the plant themselves. It's more that maybe the plant is getting weak, there's some necrotic tissue, that necrotic tissue has a bunch of bacteria in it, and the snails are getting attracted to that. So they're a great canary in the coal mine for seeing if maybe your water quality is not uber great for your plants. Here you see is some Pellia. It's not really Pellia, but this freshwater seaweed-like looking plant. And then we also have a little bit of Vallisonarium and some Java moss. And I also keep these guys with Java fern and Anubias, and they don't touch any of that. One other really cool thing about these critters is that when science started to doing experiments with them, they found some fascinating yet slightly counterintuitive features to the Plantar Bella. So if you take a bunch of these guys in there, because we now know a lot about them and what is optimum for their diet, lots of algae, lots of calcium, lots of good vegetative proteins and fats. But if you put them in with, let's say, inferior forage, like whatever algae happens to be growing in your fish tank, a bunch of green algae, and they eat on the green algae and they have a couple generations and they get really used to the green algae. If you put them in with a bunch of algae wafers and that green algae, they will, at least for the first couple generations, go for the inferior food. They won't go for the superior stuff right away. It's because science is now learning that they are less just operating on their own imperative. They're less trying to eat what's good for them, the snails, and more so trying to acquire the bacteria that they get that's best at eating whatever is available in the tank, and then they will preferentially seek out what's best for that microbiome, those critters that they require. So that's a long, convoluted way of saying you can train these guys to eat the specific crap that has overgrown in your specific tank. They can be trained like dogs, and I've actually seen and executed upon this in the service side of things. Last thing I'll mention, if you have a surplus of snails and they're growing way too much, which can happen, we have a wonderful product called the snail trap, which Danny will put in right here, and we can collect the surplus of snails from, let's say, a planted aquarium with community fish, and then we can take that surplus and we have a wonderful source of sustainable live feeds for our snail eating aquarium fish. Anything from puffers to clown loaches to clown knives, anything that really, really likes rich, meaty snail tissue. So the Plantar Bella sustainable live feed, excellent, adaptive, effective cleanup crew, breeds readily in freshwater aquariums, huge tolerances to wide ranges of temperature, and they're not ravenous plant eaters. So I can't think of a better critter to feature for our first episode of What is an Invert than the Plantar Bella. So come down here to the OSA, pick up some, and get a colony started to start a new ecosystem in your freshwater tank today.